Welcome to Can Ag Unpacked. I'm your host, Bob Friesen. We've got back with us co-host Wayne Easter, longtime veteran of the House of Commons in Ottawa, former Solicitor General, and longtime chair of the House of Commons Finance Committee. Our special guest today, Cam Goff, former National Farmers Union Vice President of Operations and Vice President of Policy. He's working on what is called the Canada Grain Act Discussion Group, and we'll hear a lot more about that later. And we want to talk about the Grain Commission, about the Canada Grain Act, as well as exactly what this discussion group is all about. But before we go there, and to set the context, Wayne, I got to ask you a question. We're talking about the Canada Grain Act today, and we're no doubt going to come back to this. But this has to do with oversight to make sure farmers have power in the marketplace. And just recently, our own government approved the merger of Viterra and Bunge. And of course, we all know that Bunge, together with the Saudi Arabia Agricultural and Investment Company, bought the Canadian Wheat Board, which is now called G3. So what? We've got one company now, overarching company now, buying 80% of grain production in Western Canada. Like, what was the government thinking, Wayne? You've got the experience there. Tell us.
They weren't. It's just that simple. They were not looking at the consequences of this decision from a farmer's perspective, I don't believe. And it is really, really serious when you get that much, basically, monopoly control in the industry. It really does leave farmers at a severe disadvantage. You know, it's only about 10 years ago, a little more than that, when farmers lost the Canadian Wheat Board, which was great to work in farmers' interests in the industry. And now you've got this conglomerate, I guess you could call them, that has virtual control over purchasing farm products, cereal grains. So it's a serious issue, and I do believe the government made a mistake. I don't know, where was the Competition Bureau in this? They should have really analyzed this, and I didn't even hear about it. It wasn't in the press. It might have been in the Western press, but I certainly didn't hear about it down here. Did they hold hearings with the farm community? Did they talk to the farm community to see what the consequences would be? I don't think so. If they didn't, they should have.
Okay, before I go to you on that, Cam, you mentioned the Competition Bureau, Wayne. I remember in dealing with the Competition Bureau and then telling me one time that their mandate called for them only to look at the impact on the consumer. In this case, it's the international marketplace that's a consumer, and farmers are left behind the eight ball. Is there something wrong with the Competition Bureau's mandate? Do they have it wrong? Should it be changed? What's going on there?
To be honest, I don't know what's going on, but if they're only looking at the consumer, you know, I think the intent of the Competition Bureau within Canada is to look at the impact of consolidation within the various industries and how does it affect the Canadian consumer. We're not talking about a Canadian consumer here. We're talking about a Canadian sellers, multitude of sellers in the farm community, and their mandate may not cover that end, but they should be. Do they need more powers added? I would suggest they do, because somebody wasn't thinking in terms of allowing, what is it, Cam, you would know better than I, is it 80% of the purchasing power in the grain sector that this company will now control? That is really serious stuff.
Cam, what do you think of that?
Well, I agree with Wayne. I'm not sure what the exact number is, but it's certainly a huge portion of the crops that are bought in Western Canada are going to be, have to go through that particular, as Wayne said, a conglomerate. But there was I wouldn't call it consultation necessarily out west, but since this is, basically a Western issue, Western grain farmer issue, there was some consultation. They did ask, if you will, for input. And as far as I'm aware, there was no farm group was happy with this going forward, and they didn't want to see it go ahead. But given really, I think you have to say the ignorance of the federal government in regards to the Western grain industry, basically made farmers' comments really, thank you, but we're going ahead anyway. So, no, it's very serious, but it's been approved, and now we're going to have to live with it unless they make a very unlikely change to their decision.
This is really something that, and this is where Parliament should be functioning. This is something that a specific parliamentary committee should have looked at. I mean, even on you remember the crow rate way back when, we even set up a special committee. I lost the fight on that one, but we even set up a special committee that I chaired to hold hearings to look at that issue. This is an even bigger issue. You would think someone would have suggested, whether it was an opposition, it could have been the opposition parties could also suggest it. Why wouldn't somebody suggest on this big a deal that there be parliamentary hearings so there could be proper input, both from the grain industry within Canada at the farm level and at the elevator level? Hold specific hearings. What are the consequences here? What are the other alternatives we could take, etc., etc., etc.? That should have been done.
Okay, thanks for that, guys. So let's go to what we want to talk about today, and I think we've set the stage well for it. And as I mentioned earlier, Cam Goff has done a lot of work on the Canada Grain Act, looking at the functioning of the Canadian Grain Commission together with Bruce Dobbs, and they've started a discussion group to talk about these issues and perhaps raise more attention to those issues. Cam, the Canada Grain Act, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, was legislated in early to mid 1900s. Why did we need it?
Oh, it was about 1912, early 1900s. And we needed it because farmers were basically at the mercy of the grain companies. Now, granted, there were a lot more grain companies around at the time, and they, were often several elevators in each town, but farmers had no say, if you will, in what they were paid for their grain. Don't forget that in those days, grain was stored in small granaries, and it was shoveled from the granary into the back of a cart, usually horse-drawn in those days. It was taken into the elevator, and the grain agent would say, "Well, I think that's a 3. It's not a 1." And the farmer was faced with the choice of either accepting that or else heading back home, shoveling it off the cart back into the granary, and then hauling it in some other time when he thought he might be able to get a better price. And the grain companies, while they did not have a acknowledged collusion, if you will, you were pretty sure that even if you took that load of grain to another elevator just down the road, you'd get the same story. So that was what farmers were forced to deal with. And of course, they didn't like it. So they lobbied the government very strongly to do something that would protect them. And in the end, and actually it didn't take long, a year or two, a few years, they had the Canada Grain Act legislation passed and enforced. And basically, that's the whole idea behind the Canada Grain Act, was to help level the field so that farmers had, something where they could take their complaints to and make sure that they were being treated fairly.
So give us a couple of the main points in the Canada Grain Act, specific points that protect the farmer? What was legislated?
Well, legislation was, and Bruce is, more knowledgeable about this than I am, but basically, they were allowed to have the grades subjected to to be looked at by somebody else, government, and decide whether or not those grades were proper, if you will, and that's carried through until still today they have mechanisms in place that allow farmers to dispute the grains, the grades that they have received when they get to the elevators, and they also did things to do with rail car allocation to make sure that cars were divided fairly or distributed fairly, if you will, to the various towns, so that there wasn't, places that had lots of grain cars where the grain was shipped away, and other towns that didn't have enough cars to take the grain away. So basically, it gave oversight. Other regulations were put into place as well that just made sure that farmers were given a fair shake when in the process of selling their grain.
So in other words,
Bob, I could give you an example which I think would, for those that might listen to this program that really don't understand the industry, that would make the point that Cam is making. Under the Canadian Grain Commission, you have grades, government grades, not company grades. And as a result, the inspectors inspect it, and it's Canada number 1 or Canada number 2, whatever the grade may be. And it's an independent sampling, so there can't be games played by the grain company. In the potato industry, we do have some Canada grades, but there's also company grades. And so when you deliver, say, to Cavendish Farms or McCain's, they'll look at your load of potatoes and they'll say, well, there's 5% cull here. So you don't get paid for the 5%. But I remember one time when I was president of the Farmers Union, Cam, we had a demonstration in New Brunswick against McCain's. And so Mr. Black was his name, the farmer, who was also heading up this demonstration. And we were complaining that the company was putting too much cullage in the loads of potatoes. So where they were normally getting 6% culls after the demonstration was over, the company decided, nope, for Mr. Black, he was going to get a 10% cull. And so it was company control. And with the Canadian Grain Commission, you're dealing with a Canada grade, or other grades may be out there as well, but there's that independent inspection, and the company can't give you more cullage or more dockage than is proper under the grade.
So it's fair to say then that the Canada Grain Act was supposed to protect farmers when they delivered their grain, that they got the grade that they deserved, the actual grade, because of course it's easy for a grain company who would like to buy low and sell high for them to grade based on whatever market they might have for the grain, to make sure that they're honest when it came to weights. Of course, back then, as you said, Cam, there was a lot more grain companies, and so if a farmer didn't like how he was treated by one company, he could always look around and find another company. We just talked about a scenario now where that really is no longer the place. It could be easy for farmers to say, well, you know something, we have evolved so much, we don't shovel our grain anymore. We have huge grain carts, we have huge combines. We're talking 5 to 10 to 15, 20,000 acres per farm. So we've evolved. Do we still need the production? But then when you look at the fact that now there's only 1 or 2 grain companies buying the product, a farmer can no longer look around and say, well, if I'm not treated right here, I'll go over there, when there is no one over there to treat him better. So would you say the Canada Grain Act is still very relevant and very important, or is it, like some people have suggested, time to let it go?
Well, I certainly think it's still important. I mean, really, we're still in the same type of situation now as we were 100 years ago, where we really don't have any power, if you will. And just a point of clarification for those people who may not be familiar with this particular topic, if you will. The Canada Grain Act is the enabling legislation overarching, and the Canada Grain Commission is mandated under the Canada Grain Act. There are two. The Canada Grain Commission, or CGC, is a organization, whereas the Canada Grain Act is the legislation. But they both are hand in glove. And the Canada Grain Act stipulates that it is to provide regulation to the industry in the interests of producers. It's actually pointed out in that wording, or very similar wording, that they're there to help producers. They're not there to help the grain companies. Now, obviously, farmers need a system of companies to purchase the grain, move the grain to port, and move it on to ships. And when the wheat board was brought in the 1940s, I believe, it was, they were not allowed to own any actual infrastructure that handled grain. That was left in the hands of the company, or companies, plural. But it's still that situation where farmers are basically on their own, if you will, except for the Canada Grain Act as protection. Yes, it is still critically important to the farmers of Western Canada that it exists and functions properly.
I'd say it's more important than ever, Cam. I really think when you see this kind of concentration at the purchasing end, it makes the need for greater protection on weights, on grades, etc., for farmers even greater. And so I would say it's more important than ever.
Yeah, and the Grain Act makes sure that, as you say, Wade, that the scales are checked at the elevators and terminals. They test the equipment that does the moisture. They test equipment that does the protein, falling number. All of those things are basically under regulation to be looked after. But of course, if they don't enforce the regulations, then the regulations become problematic, if you will, if they're actually going to accomplish what they're supposed to. And that is certainly something that has been happening over the past, especially the past 15 years since since the wheat board was eliminated, is that the oversight has not been there.
When I grew up, my father was a very small grain farmer, and when he delivered grain to the elevator, about 6 miles from the farm, because back then, of course, you had a grain elevator in every little village, he would always hope that the elevator manager would be in a good mood that day when he delivered the grain. Because whether the guy was in a good mood or not, whether he'd had a good breakfast or his family was kind to him when he walked out the door, determined how he graded grain sometimes. He might say to my dad, well, this is not a very good quality, so sorry, I can only give you this grade. Or he might say, it's not very good quality, but wait a minute, I've got some great quality in the bin over there. I'll mix yours with that, and then I'll sell it as a higher grade. And so that's why my father wanted him to be in a good mood. Do grain companies cheat farmers whenever they can?
Somewhat depends on the managers, but I mean, these companies, they're businesses. They are supposed to make money. The more money they make, the happier they are, just like farmers or any other business. And they're not going to give you a break if they don't have to. I mean, that's just the way business works, unfortunately. And even at the higher echelons, I mean, the directors of those companies are required by law to act in the interests of the corporation. They are not supposed to act in the interests of the people that they're getting their product from. So, yes, the grain companies will absolutely treat farmers unfairly if it's to their benefit. I don't think that's surprising. Doesn't surprise me, but it sure doesn't make me happy. And that's why institutions like the Grain Commission and the Canada Grain Act are critical, I believe, to farmers' interests.
What you're looking at here is basically the Canadian Grain Commission, working under the Canadian Grain Act, is really helpful in terms of balance of power. It kind of balances the power of the buyer along with the rights of the seller. So that's why it's so critical. Because these big guys, if they want to manipulate the system, and they certainly do with dockage and everything else, then they can get away with it if there's not that entity there and the inspectors there to protect the farmer's interest.
Okay, gentlemen, let's set that one aside for a little bit. I want to come back to the Canada Grain Act review, but we've already touched on the Canadian Grain Commission. And I think we've also mentioned that they're there as an oversight body to make sure that farmers are not taken advantage of. I'm familiar with that because in supply management, of course, we had oversight boards appointed by the government to make sure that farmers didn't abuse their legislated right to set the price. Here we have an oversight body that's meant to make sure that the industry does not abuse its power over farmers. Is the Canadian Grain Commission doing its job, Cam?
They're certainly, I don't believe they're doing as good a job as they should be doing. Certainly the commissioners, and there are three of them. There's a chief commissioner, an assistant chief commissioner, and just a commissioner. And up until the Trudeau government, they were basically purely patronage appointments. When Trudeau came in, there was a process that was involved to apply and then be appointed. But they're still appointments. I guess I have been disappointed with some of the commissioners over the past essentially 20 years or so. They haven't, I don't think, they've been more interested in putting forward a government view than they are to actually, strictly focusing on farmers' interests. So I think there is work to be done there to make sure that the commissioners are not only aware of their responsibility to be looking after the interests of farmers, but to also actively pursue that knowledge.
Wayne, you were always the Ottawa's agricultural minister by proxy or by default for 28 years. And so you know all this stuff, and you were also keenly interested not only in Eastern Canadian agriculture, but in Western Canadian agriculture. What sort of knowledge can you bring to the table as far as, and I know you even dealt directly with the ag minister sometime on commission issues. Do you think they're doing their job?
No, I don't. They're not doing their job. They've lost their focus on, as Cam said earlier, Canadian Grain Commission legislation in the interest of the farmer. They've lost that focus, and part of it does relate. Cam said, he was not satisfied with recent appointments, and they used to be patronage appointments or appointments basically at the political level. It became a political discussion. You talk to the minister, etc., etc. But with Trudeau, it changed to be bureaucratic decision makers making the decisions. So X number of people apply for this certain job, and they have their resume and their letters of support and so on. They're interested in a job. And the bureaucrats in Ottawa that are making these decisions now and making recommendations certainly to the Prime Minister and the appointments people, the Minister of Agriculture in this case, they make the recommendations and an appointment's made. In the old way, everybody talks about political patronage as if it's a bad thing. But I'll tell you, if you're a politician, understanding the needs of Western farmers, then you're going to try and appoint somebody, because you're on the ground out there, or some of your people are on the ground out there. They see what's happening in the industry. They know some of these individuals, not based on a piece of paper and a resume. And so I think those appointments were better because they were made by politicians who understood and knew the individuals. Now it's got too bureaucratic, in my point of view.
That's an interesting and excellent point, Wayne, because it seems to me that the civil servants, if they're interviewing prospects, they're certainly not reminding the applicant that they are supposed to work in the commission in the best interests of farmers. Do you think a civil servant has ever told an applicant, are you sure you're going to represent farmers well?
I doubt it very much. In fact, the same thing happened with the Senate appointments under the new process as well. Up until recently, maybe in the last 5 years, the only senator that we had in there was Black from Senator Black from Ontario, who worked with one of the marketing agencies for a few years, but there wasn't a fisherman or a farmer in the Senate. That to me is not a sensible Senate. And it was because they're looking at all these resumes and they got a degree and they got this and they got the other thing and their big interest in one specific area. And so the bureaucracy or the appointment process recommends it to the Prime Minister and they get appointed. There's nothing wrong with politicians who know the folks on the ground better making the recommendations, in my point of view.
Okay, so how can that be changed? Is it as simple as just simply saying, okay, we should get, and I agree with you, people often think patronage appointments are a bad thing, but certainly you've shed some light on why it could definitely be a good thing. How can we change, Cam, how can we change the commissioner appointments to something where they will know what the commission is there to do? Maybe they need to have a 6-week school for these applicants or these would-be commissioners.
Well, there has been talk in the last, well, it's probably actually been about 10 years, but it may become a little bit more to the fore in the last year or two about actually changing the structure of the Canadian Grain Commission to basically do away with the commissioners and have something more like an elected board or an appointed board. That can have its problems too, but the idea there was that if you went that route, you could have some of the Western Canadian farm organizations like Sask Wheat or Alberta Grains or the Manitoba, Crop Alliance, basically make recommendations as to who was to sit on that board, and one would hope that then there would be a certainty of knowledgeable farmers who were actually sitting down when the decisions were being made. There has been a history over the past 20 years probably of commissioners having farm experience, but not necessarily being farmers. And while, I was sort of against this idea up until about 2 years ago, I'm maybe leaning a little more that way now, just to try and make sure we get knowledgeable people who are, can sit on the board and or sit on that commission and put forward what's important to farmers and why it's important to farmers. And that would be, I think, a large help.
It strikes me that we've got another challenge, and that is the whole generational issue, and that is that many farmers today may not appreciate some of the empowerment tools that farmers needed in the past. And because of the evolution at the farm gate level, many of these farmers may think, well, we can do without some of those regulatory guidelines or protocols or any of those farmer empowerment tools because of the changes in the evolution that we've seen in the industry. You know, it's not sexy anymore to think farm gate, right? You have to think now commercial industry and what's best for the industry. And farmers may be lost in that, especially if the evolution in the downstream industry is much faster and much more impactful than any evolution and changes that you see at the farm gate level. So is there a whole new approach that needs to be taken to make sure that farmers are aware of what may happen if we don't make sure that some of these regulations stay in place or are even improved, even though you might adapt them to the current environment, but that they stay in place to make sure that farmers don't lose out in the end. Wayne, what do you think?
Well, I think there's certainly been a switch, and a lot of it relates to these things. You know, there's some people out there that believe, well, you know, with the information that I can get over technology right now, you know, I can understand the markets as well as Cargill or the old Canadian Wheat Board, who had teams of people looking at markets and trends and so on. But you know, I'm smart with these smartphones, and I can do it myself. There is that attitude out there that you know, people think they can make it big on their own. And I don't think there's enough understanding of the importance of some of these institutions and agencies that are there to protect their interests. As we said earlier in this discussion, you know, with the concentration on the purchasing power within the industry, there needs to be some protection for this diverse farm community. Yes, they're bigger farms, but there's still a lot of them as compared to mainly, to a great extent, one buyer.
We've had an interminable, it seems like, review going on of the Canada Grain Act. Wayne, I'm sure it started when years before you retired as a member of Parliament. You will probably recall when the Ag Committee first started doing hearings on the Canada Grain Act. It's gone on forever. Elections have always gotten in the way. Right now, I've got it from a really good source that there doesn't seem to be the appetite on anybody's part to even move forward with a review. And yet it seems like we have a commission that is either confused or lost or deliberately not doing its job. Where does it, what do we do?
Well, I think farm organizations in the West need to start to put pressure on their MPs. If you know, if I was in a position in farm leadership, what I'd be suggesting is, look at the names of the Agriculture Committee specifically, and the Finance Committee. What are the members on there? And let's do an organized pressure campaign on those members to say one of the issues this Parliament needs to look at and have a deadline to get it done is the Canadian Grain Act, how the appointment process is done, what the requirements are under it, are they been met, where are the problems, etc., etc. And I throw in, get the Finance Committee members too, because Finance Committee is involved in all things. I chaired it for many years, and it's crucial that the members on the Finance Committee know, hey, there's a problem here in the agricultural industry with the Canadian Grain Act. Maybe we need to make a recommendation that there needs to be hearings specifically on this by another committee other than us, but they could also put some pressure on the Agriculture Minister and the Prime Minister to do what needs to be done. Have a hearing process, get some decisions made, and hopefully come out the pipe at the other end with a better agency and better regulations or actions that are working in the interests of primary producers.
Cam, what do you think?
Well, actually, that is one of the things that the group that I am part of was formed. The Canadian Grain Act Discussion Group was to.
And tell us about that group, please do.
Well, it's basically it was Bruce Dodd's brainchild, if you will. He had worked for with farm organizations in Western Canada, and was familiar with a bunch of farmers, and basically realized that if most farmers, as you say, Bob, don't really understand the mechanisms, if you will, regulations behind their industry. They're great on how to grow a crop, but they're not quite so great on the levers that are behind the purchase, etc., and marketing of the of their grain. They just they don't find it sexy enough. So anyway, we wanted to get a group of farmers together who would actually, lobby for the Canada Grain Act and the Canada Grain Commission. Now, we never intended and don't want to, can't replace the general farm organizations of Saskatchewan, Alberta Grain, and Manitoba Crop Alliance. But those organizations have a whole bunch of things on their plate. They deal with plant breeding. They do deal with regulations such as the Canada Grain Act and the Grain Commission. But it's only a part of what they're expected to do. So, we were trying to get them to concentrate on the Canada Grain Act by lobbying them. We approached them a year or two ago and said, "No, look, this is really important. We feel that it's sort of fallen off the radar, and it's important that all of the farm groups work together." Because you mentioned the Canada Grain Act review. That actually started in, I believe, 2020. There were no hearings, but they did ask for submissions from anybody who was interested to please send it in to the Ag Canada, and they would look over these submissions and then they would make recommendations. And one of the arguments we had with that approach was they would not make those submissions public. All the farm groups made their submissions, available on their website, but the railroads didn't. Western Grain Elevator Association didn't. We didn't know, what Cargill. We didn't even know who had, sent these submissions in and what they had suggested be done. So, we started to work on. Basically, we approached all of the major farm organizations in Western Canada and said, "Look, you have to get together and work on this." And they did. They formed a one-day session in Saskatoon, and they talked about it. But unfortunately, since then, nothing's happened. Yeah, there was good conversation. There was an agreement to move forward on it, but nothing happened. So, we have to prod them. It's a matter of constantly reminding people how important this is, because unfortunately, most farmers, as I say, it's not their area of interest. There's a lot to learn. They know that they don't know everything they should, so they sort of throw up their hands and hope that their farm organizations will look after things. And the farm organizations are great, but they're not doing what they should on this issue.
Well, the fact that they didn't want to make the submissions public, that really comes as no surprise. There's nothing that government mandarins hate more than strong consensus from the farm community. And shades of perdition if all those submissions were suddenly to show that there was actually a strong consensus on some of the Canada Grain Act issues, then they wouldn't have the ability to decide for themselves how it should move forward. And I mean, we've seen that before. We saw that when they dismantled the agricultural minister's safety net advisory committee. Again, I believe that was done only because we achieved really strong consensus at that committee level, and that left the department no wiggle room to go to the minister and say, the industry can't agree on anything, we should do this, when in fact the industry was agreeing on some very important points. So that comes as no surprise. But there also doesn't, and I don't know how to get, and you've maybe already given them a wake-up call, Cam, by saying farm organizations need to do more about this. I don't think it's going to go anywhere unless someone starts getting more vocal about it. Wayne, what do you think?
No, people have to get more vocal, and the thing on this is a critical issue. First, just to back up a little bit, I find it astounding, I guess, that the submissions made over the relevance of a public agency like the Canadian Grain Commission, that they wouldn't release that information from all the people who put submissions in. That's a government responsibility to ensure that information related to public agencies are public and transparent. That's ridiculous if you ask me. If you're going to all the players, they should have had a website set up with all the information that comes in. If the grain companies have a certain position, then let them defend it, let them promote it, let them stand by it. That's fine, what their position is, but it shouldn't be in secret. It should be out there in the public arena. But definitely, farm organizations and farm leadership is going to have to get together to push the point.
Wayne, so when you say grain companies, Wayne, that is almost a misnomer. From now on, we will have to say when the grain company comes to the table. Go ahead, Cam.
Cam.
Our group did file an access to information issue with the information commissioner. We had asked the AAFC to please supply us with all of the submissions, and they said, no, we can't do that. We never said they were going to be publicized. So anyway, we launched an access to information after about a year and plus of playing around, if you will. They actually provided us with a very poorly, if you will, redacted version of all the submissions, where usually you're used to seeing, when somebody shows you something that they've received that has had redactions, there's black lines where they've crossed stuff out. The stuff we got was just blank. We didn't know who had done it. There were parts of pages, whole pages. Some submissions weren't even there. So we then filed an appeal with the information commissioner, and they said no. They looked at it and they said no, this is not good, and it went back to AAFC to redo it. And now this is 3 years later, and we still haven't got the new submission from AAFC as to what the submissions were, or a new study, whatever you want to call it. It's still in process, and the last time I checked, they were still waiting to hand this off to information commissioner was waiting to hand this off to one of their people to make sure AAFC did it correctly. So that's it's terrible, but we're trying to do what we can.
On that one, Cam, I would, as soon as you can as a group, write a letter to the new Minister of Agriculture and copy it to the Prime Minister saying, this is the process we've been going through for 3 years. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada asked for submissions relative to the Canadian Grain Commission. Submissions were made. They're being held in secret. This is wrong. That the minister should order his department to release that information or explain why they can't. I'd even go as far as this a cover up on the part of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada to protect the interests of the grain companies against the interest of farmers?
Well, been there, done that, Wayne.
Okay.
We had one senator replied. I don't think I actually sent to the Prime Minister Trudeau at the time, but certainly the Ag Minister Macaulay, every member of the Senate Ag Committee, every member of the Commons Ag Committee, and also senators that we knew were agriculturally inclined, like Rob Black, and
Mary
one,
Roberts.
maybe two replies saying, "Oh yeah,
Well, you know,
it should
Cam,
happen."
what
Do
you
it
need to
again.
do is,
Well,
the
yeah,
current ag minister actually lives quite nearby Wayne Easter. You may not know this, but Minister McDonald has the same seat that Wayne had when he was a member of Parliament.
I
And
didn't.
so if you tell Wayne right now, Wayne, tell the minister there's a big freight train coming right at him on the Great Canada Grain Act issue. He needs to be proactive about it. He can talk to him at the next time they have their shits and giggles at the bar in PEI someplace.
I'll actually see him tomorrow night.
There you go. Listen, Cam, this has been great. So you have a website, I believe, called talkcga. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and people can go to talkcga and they can look at what it is that you're doing. And of course, you're always open to new members.
Yeah.
I can assure you certainly some of this, as well as the fact that we now have, for all intents and purposes, about one grain company in Western Canada that's buying grain. That will come up in our inaugural meeting of Canadian Agriculture Unpacked, the Senate, the Chamber of Second Sober Thought. We will no doubt talk about it in that episode as well. So thank you very much. Your partner in crime, Mr. Dodds, didn't make it. Maybe he fell under a grain cart, I'm not sure. But hopefully we can have him on next time. Wayne, thank you to you as well. And all the best in your initiative, Cam.
Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank you and Wayne and Aj. And yeah, it's something farmers really need to work on. So thanks for
And
everything.
It's
to
a
the
fun-
viewer, if you've eaten today or will be eating today, don't forget to thank a farmer. Thanks, gentlemen.
True.
Great. It's a fight worth fighting. Keep it up.
Yeah.